The PG era is often considered the darkest era in WWE history. It's when legends like Shawn Michaels and Edge retired, while John Cena dominated the main event scene with his bright t-shirts, and celebrity guest hosts took over Raw. But was the PG era actually all trash? I mean, we also got CM Punk's pipe bomb, the debuts of the Nexus, the Shield and Wyatt family, the rise of Daniel Bryan, and other key moments that changed WWE history. So in this video, let's explore the entire history of the PG era, from its origins in 2009 all the way to its end around 2015, and revisit the moments, the feuds, and matches that defined it, the controversial decisions that damaged WWE, and what exactly made this era so polarizing. When Randy Orton became a menace to society, when The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels gave us the greatest match in WrestleMania history, when Big Show chokeslammed John Cena to the Shadow Realm, when Jeff Hardy's sudden exit broke everybody's heart, when Chris Jericho unmasked Rey Mysterio, when CM Punk became the most hated man on SmackDown. And these are just some of the things that happened during the crazy year of 2009. Most wrestling fans hate this year because they remember 2009 as the year WWE fully transitioned into the PG era. However, despite the PG restrictions, 2009 was filled with personal rivalries, shocking title changes, and career-defining performances that fans still rewatch to this day. So what made 2009 so special yet so underrated? What were the matches, feuds, and moments that defined WWE's dive in the PG era? Let's rewind the clock and relive the chaos of WWE in 2009. By the end of 2008, Randy Orton was already an established main event star. He'd won world championships, feuded with legends like The Undertaker, and the Legend Killer was one of the top stars in the company. However, in 2009, Randy Orton went full-on psycho mode and terrorized the entire wrestling world. His first target was none other than Vince McMahon. After a heated standoff, the Viper straight up kicked the chairman in the skull and established himself as the company's top heel. Randy then went on to win the 2009 Royal Rumble, punching his ticket to the main event of WrestleMania. But Orton wasn't done with the McMahon family. When Vince's daughter Stephanie brought back her brother Shane to deal with Orton, Randy ended up punting him in the skull too. But he didn't stop there either. He even RKO'd Stephanie and stood tall over her with a cold, emotionless stare. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. And there was one man who couldn't let it slide: Triple H. Triple H and Stephanie were married in real life. Heading into WrestleMania, the game wasn't just defending his championship. He was defending his family. Triple H invaded Orton's home and attacked him ruthlessly. But the Viper got his revenge days later when he handcuffed Triple H and kissed Stephanie right in front of him. The feud built to a boiling point heading into WrestleMania 25. Triple H promised he would end Randy once and for all on the grandest stage of them all, while Orton wanted revenge for Triple H kicking him out of Evolution 5 years ago. After almost 25 minutes of back-and-forth action, Triple H beat Orton and retained the WWE Championship. Orton's era of terror was over, or so everyone thought. But while Randy was making the McMahon's life a living hell on Raw, another iconic rivalry was gearing up for its final chapter. John Cena had entered 2009 as the World Heavyweight Champion after returning from injury and dethroning Chris Jericho. However, if Edge is on the same roster as Cena, you know Cena's life won't be peaceful. But here's the thing. In early 2009, Edge and Cena weren't even on the same roster. But the Rated R superstar still managed to finesse the system one more time. At No Way Out, Edge lost the WWE Championship inside the Elimination Chamber after being quickly eliminated by Jeff Hardy. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief thinking his reign of terror was finally over. But the Master Manipulator wasn't going away so easily. Later in the night, Edge attacked Kofi Kingston while he was making his entrance and took his spot in the World Championship Elimination Chamber match. When the night was over, Edge had lost a world title and won another within a span of 3 hours. The stage was set for another epic clash between Cena and Edge. It looked like the most iconic rivalry of the Ruthless Aggression era was finally going to get its WrestleMania spotlight. Except there was a twist. WWE inserted Big Show into the match, turning it into a triple threat. Show had been caught in a love triangle with Edge and Vicky on SmackDown, and he wasn't about to let Cena and Edge settle things without him. At WrestleMania, the three collided in a hard-hitting affair. But in the end, it was Cena who overcame the odds, capturing his 5th World Heavyweight Championship and bringing the title back to Raw. However, Edge wasn't finished yet. He invoked his rematch clause at Backlash, and this time it was a last man standing match. Cena fought valiantly, but towards the end, Big Show appeared out of nowhere and chokeslammed Cena through a spotlight. Cena laid motionless, and Edge stole the victory. The World Heavyweight Championship was returning to SmackDown once again, but Edge's celebration was about to be cut short by a certain charismatic enigma. Jeff Hardy had ended 2008 on top of the world, finally capturing his childhood dream when he won the WWE Championship at Armageddon. But 2009 would prove that staying on top was far harder than getting there. Hardy's first major challenger was none other than Edge. The rated R superstar wanted to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, and at the Royal Rumble, he got his chance. In a shocking turn of events, Hardy lost the championship when his own brother Matt interfered and cost him the match. The betrayal was gut-wrenching. The Hardy brothers had been fan favorites for over a decade. They'd won tag team gold together, stolen shows with ladder matches, and shared countless memorable moments. But jealousy had been eating away at Matt. He was tired of living in his younger brother's shadow, tired of watching Jeff get all the glory while he fought for scraps. At the Royal Rumble, that jealousy exploded. Their brother versus brother feud consumed the first few months of the year. Matt claimed Jeff was selfish, reckless, and undeserving of his success. Jeff just wanted to understand why his own flesh and blood would stab him in the back. The Hardys collided multiple times throughout the spring. Matt got the win at WrestleMania, but Jeff got his revenge at Backlash. However, Jeff couldn't focus solely on his brother. He still had championship aspirations, and Edge was now holding the gold after defeating Cena. At Judgment Day, Hardy challenged Edge for the title, and just when it looked like Jeff might recapture the gold, Matt Hardy interfered again. The assist allowed Edge to retain, leaving Jeff frustrated once more. Finally, at Extreme Rules, everything came together. Jeff defeated Edge in a brutal ladder match, his specialty, to win the big gold. The charismatic Enigma was back on top, but his celebration lasted all of about 30 seconds. CM Punk's music hit. The Second City Saint walked down the ramp with his Money in the Bank briefcase, the same one he'd won at WrestleMania months earlier. Hardy was exhausted, broken, barely able to stand. Punk cashed in and within minutes became the new World Heavyweight Champion. Jeff's moment of glory had been ripped away in the cruelest fashion possible, and this led to the most heated rivalry of the summer on SmackDown. CM Punk was the straight-edge superstar who preached about living clean, about avoiding drugs and alcohol. Jeff Hardy had a well-documented history with substance issues. Punk used this against him, constantly berating Hardy for his past mistakes, calling him a failure and a bad role model for kids. They traded wins throughout the summer, and finally, at SummerSlam, they met in a tables, ladders, and chairs match with the World Heavyweight Championship on the line. In a shocking outcome, CM Punk defeated Jeff Hardy to retain his title in what many considered Hardy's signature match type. But the feud didn't end there. SmackDown wasn't big enough for the two of them. Punk and Hardy faced off once again on an episode of SmackDown in a loser leaves WWE steel cage match. Punk won the match, forcing the charismatic Enigma to leave the company. Fans were devastated, kids were crying, and Jeff's glorious run had come to an abrupt end. The backstage reason was that Hardy needed time to heal from injuries, but the real story was darker. WWE chose not to renew his contract when it expired a few months later due to continuing substance abuse issues. Jeff Hardy's meteoric 2009 had ended not with glory, but with a painful goodbye. Had Jeff stayed with the company, he could have main-evented WrestleManias and even become the face of WWE. To this day, it remains one of the biggest what-ifs in wrestling history. But before we get too deep into the summer chaos, we need to rewind back to WrestleMania 25 when two legends created magic. The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak stood at 16 wins. For nearly 2 decades, nobody had been able to defeat the dead man at the Showcase of Immortals. Legends had tried and failed. Champions had fallen before him. The streak had become as iconic as WrestleMania itself. But now The Undertaker faced his most dangerous challenge yet, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. This wasn't just another match. This was symbolic. Heaven versus hell. The showstopper versus the phenom. It was a dream encounter between two of the greatest performers in WWE history, and somehow it exceeded every expectation. Leading up to Mania, HBK had outsmarted the dead man at every step. Taker had never defeated Michaels one-on-one in a big match situation. It looked like HBK had the psychological advantage. But when it's the night of WrestleMania, The Undertaker becomes something absolutely mythical. For 30 minutes, the two legends delivered perfection. Near falls had the crowd on their feet. Signature moves were countered. Finishers were kicked out of. At one point, The Undertaker attempted a dive to the outside, but the move went horribly wrong. He came dangerously close to landing directly on his head in what could have been a career-ending situation. Michaels nearly won by countout as the dead man struggled to make it back into the ring. Michaels hit sweet chin music flush, but Undertaker kicked out. Taker hit the tombstone, but it wasn't enough. Every 2 count felt like it could be the one to end the streak. The Houston crowd was losing their minds with every passing moment. In the closing sequence, Michaels attempted a moonsault, but The Undertaker caught him midair and drove him down with a thunderous tombstone piledriver. As Michaels lay motionless in the ring, The Undertaker slowly rose to his feet. Both men had left everything they had out there. The match match received universal praise from critics and fans alike. It set an impossible standard for every Mania match that followed. Even today, many fans consider it the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. But while Taker and HBK were stealing the show, Randy Orton was trying to literally end careers. Remember when we thought the age of Orton was over after Triple H beat Randy at WrestleMania? Well, that didn't last long. At Backlash, just weeks after losing the championship, Orton found his way back to the top. In a six-man tag team match, a pre-match stipulation stated that if Orton pinned Triple H, he'd become champion. And that's exactly what happened. The Viper was back on top. The age of Orton was upon us once again. But Randy's second reign would be short-lived. At Extreme Rules, Batista defeated him to capture the championship. However, '09 Orton wasn't going to stay down so easily. If he couldn't beat you in a match, he would simply put you out of action. Randy and Legacy attacked Batista, broke his arm, and forced him to vacate the title. With no champion, WWE held a fatal four-way match, and once again, Randy Orton emerged victorious. This third reign would prove to be his longest of the year. Orton successfully defended against Triple H, finally putting their feud to rest in a brutal 3 stages of hell match. But as one rivalry ended, another was about to heat up. John Cena had moved on from his battles with Edge and Big Show, and now he had his sights set squarely on the WWE Championship. His feud with Orton dominated the second half of 2009. At SummerSlam in August, Orton used every dirty trick in the book and walked out as champion once again. Finally, at Breaking Point in September, Cena defeated Randy Orton in an I Quit match to capture the WWE Championship, but Orton invoked his rematch clause immediately. At Hell in a Cell inside the demonic structure, Orton regained the championship in controversial fashion. The rivalry reached its epic conclusion at Bragging Rights in October with a 60-minute Iron Man match. For a full hour, Cena and Orton battled back and forth, trading falls and punishment. At one point, Randy even tried to blow up Cena with pyro, but the GOAT won't stay down. In the final moments, with the score tied, Cena locked Orton in the STF, and the Viper had no choice but to tap out. John Cena stood tall as champion, and their legendary 2009 rivalry had finally reached its conclusion. But 2009 wasn't just about main event rivalries. Throughout the year, other compelling stories unfolded. DX reunited and had an epic feud with Legacy that included a Hell in a Cell match, a submissions match, and HBK and Triple H even had an epic TLC match against Jericho. Speaking of TLC, the December pay-per-view delivered one of the biggest shocks of the year. Sheamus, a relative newcomer who'd only been on the main roster for a few months, defeated John Cena in a tables match to become WWE champion. The year also saw The Undertaker reclaim the World Heavyweight Championship, CM Punk's transformation into one of the company's top heels, Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio's entertaining feud over the IC title, and Kofi Kingston's brief run in the main event scene before Randy thought he was stupid. While fans remained divided about 2009, the year proved that WWE could still deliver great stories, shocking moments, and unforgettable matches even with the PG restrictions. But as we got deeper into the PG madness in 2010, WWE struggled to keep up. If you ask wrestling historians, the PG era started in 2009, but even in '09 the company had some controversial angles, like Randy Orton kissing Stephanie McMahon, Triple H invading Orton's home, hardcore matches, and other moments that helped retain WWE's edge. However, it was the year 2010 when WWE went full PG mode. 2010 was the year that saw Shawn Michaels bet his entire career on one match, when a group of rookies invaded Raw and nearly burned the whole thing down. When the world title changed hands so many times, it was hard to keep track. And these are just some of the things that made 2010 unpredictable. But let's start from the very beginning. Our story begins at the Royal Rumble, where Shawn Michaels entered the match with one thing on his mind: getting back to The Undertaker. A year earlier, the two had delivered what many called the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. HBK had been obsessed with a rematch ever since, but The Undertaker had turned him down. So Michaels tried to win the Rumble, earn a title shot against the Phenom, and it almost worked. But with HBK on the verge of winning, Batista eliminated him, and Michaels snapped. He sat on the floor staring into nothing, and then started super kicking referees. It was one of the most devastating moments the Rumble had ever produced. With the conventional route closed, HBK chose Plan B. At the Elimination Chamber, he crawled out from underneath the chamber structure and super-kicked The Undertaker, costing him the world title. He didn't care about the consequences. He just needed The Undertaker angry enough to accept the rematch, and it worked. The Undertaker agreed, but on one condition: if Michaels lost, his career was over. Streak versus career. At WrestleMania 26, they delivered another masterpiece. For over 20 minutes, Michaels threw everything he had at the dead man. And when he slapped The Undertaker across the face and dared him to finish it, you could feel the entire building hold its breath. The streak survived, and Shawn Michaels' career was over. But while Michaels was writing his final chapter, John Cena was about to face something he'd never dealt with before. Cena came into 2010 as the face of WWE, and his road to WrestleMania was a hero's journey. He defeated Batista for the WWE Championship at Mania 26, but after Cena wrapped up his feud against the Animal at Over the Limit, something far more explosive arrived. On June 7th, the rookies from the first season of NXT decided to make their presence known in the most violent way possible. Led by Wade Barrett, 8 men stormed the Raw set, dismantled the ring, destroyed the announce table, and left John Cena lying in the rubble. It was one of the most shocking endings to a Raw episode in years. For weeks, the group terrorized Raw with a level of unpredictability that the PG era desperately needed. Barrett made it clear that Cena was the target. The collision course was set. And heading into SummerSlam, the Nexus faced a Team WWE lineup that included Cena, Edge, Chris Jericho, Bret Hart, John Morrison, R-Truth, and in a massive surprise, the recently fired and rehired Daniel Bryan. The match needed to be the moment where the Nexus became legit main event threats. Instead, Cena single-handedly dismantled the Nexus and ruined their momentum. Barrett continued feuding with Cena through the fall. There was even a brief stretch where Cena was forced to join the Nexus against his will. But the steam had leaked out of the angle. By December, Cena had quite literally buried Barrett under a pile of steel chairs at TLC. The hottest faction in years had been dismantled almost as quickly as it was built. But while all of that was happening on Raw, the SmackDown World Heavyweight Championship was being passed around like hot potato. The year started with The Undertaker holding the belt, but losing it at Elimination Chamber to Chris Jericho after interference from HBK. Heading into WrestleMania 26, Chris Jericho versus the Royal Rumble winner, Edge was the main feud for the title. Jericho retained, but just 2 nights later on SmackDown, Jack Swagger cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase and pinned Jericho to become World Heavyweight Champion. His reign struggled to generate real heat as champion, and by June, Rey Mysterio had taken the belt from him. Then, after Mysterio retained the title against Swagger at Money in the Bank, Kane cashed in his own briefcase and won the belt in under a minute. Kane's reign tied into a personal feud where he was convinced someone had attacked his brother The Undertaker and left him in a vegetative state, and he was determined to find out who. It was eventually revealed that Kane was the attacker all along, and the two brothers collided inside Hell in a Cell. Kane held the title all the way to December when Edge dethroned him, winning his 10th World Championship and ending 2010 on top of the blue brand. Apart from this, 2010 also gave us the return of Bret Hart, burying the hatchet with Shawn Michaels on live TV. Meanwhile, Daniel Bryan spent the year going from NXT rookie to US champion at warp speed by defeating The Miz. The Miz himself ended the year by cashing in his Money in the Bank briefcase on a beaten Randy Orton and becoming WWE champion for the first time. But as 2010 came to an end, it was time for the weirdest year in WWE history. A year that saw the WrestleMania main event end in a countout, when Raw would regularly be interrupted by this.
It doesn't matter what you think!
When Mark Henry and Big Show broke the ring. When Rey Mysterio became WWE champion just to get wrecked by Super Cena on the same night. When R-Truth started talking to his imaginary friend. When everyone found out that Kevin Nash was still somehow alive. And we also got whatever the hell this was.
Bruh.
I've been a wrestling fan for almost 30 years, and I can tell you without a shadow of doubt that 2011 was the weirdest, most bipolar, and most schizophrenic year in WWE history. You'd have a banger like Triple H versus Undertaker, and the next moment, Snooki was doing cartwheels in the ring. You'd have Edge's retirement making you all emotional, and the next moment, Michael Cole was trying to get Jerry Lawler to lick his feet. On one hand, you had CM Punk delivering the pipe bomb, but then you'd turn around and have Kevin Nash trying not to blow out his quads on Raw. And these are just some of the wild antics WWE was throwing at us in 2011. It felt like the company couldn't decide if it wanted to be Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, or The Truman Show. So what exactly made 2011 the weirdest year in WWE history? What were the baffling moments, storylines, and creative decisions that turned Monday Night Raw into an unpredictable fever dream? And how did a company manage to produce the most exciting angle in a decade and some of the most embarrassing television in the same year? Let's take a trip down memory lane and relive the insanity that was WWE in 2011. The year kicked off with WWE building toward WrestleMania 27, and right from the start, something felt off. The Rock had returned to host WrestleMania, which should have been a huge deal on its own, but instead of letting that moment breathe, WWE immediately jumped the gun. Rock and Cena immediately started tearing into each other, and the seeds were planted for their Mania encounter, which was more than a year away. This meant the actual WWE Championship match at this year's show was treated like a meaningless obstacle in the way of the real story. The Miz was the champion heading into WrestleMania 27, and WWE made him feel like such an afterthought that most fans probably forgot he was even in the main event. The entire build focused on Rock and Cena trading insults, while Miz stood awkwardly in the background like a third wheel on a date. But when WrestleMania finally arrived, the main event somehow managed to be even worse than the build-up. The biggest show of the year, the main event for the most prestigious championship in wrestling, ended with both guys lying outside the ring while the referee counted to 10. But wait, it gets worse. The Rock, serving as guest host, restarted the match to give the fans a proper ending. Except his idea of a proper ending was hitting John Cena with a rock bottom, allowing The Miz to crawl over and pin the company's top babyface to retain the championship. So not only did the main event end in a non-finish, but when it was restarted, the face of the company got screwed in the middle of the ring to set up a match that was more than a year away. The message was clear. This WrestleMania didn't matter. The Miz's reign didn't matter. All that mattered was planting the seeds for Rock versus Cena next year, and everything else was just filler. After this disaster, The Miz went from WWE champion to a mid-card comedy act within months. But while the WWE championship picture was a mess, the world heavyweight title scene on SmackDown was going through its own identity crisis that somehow managed to be even more confusing. In 2011, we got the biggest Rumble the company had seen to date. Instead of 30, you had 40 men in the Rumble, and honestly, it was pretty dope. You had John Morrison becoming Spider-Man, you had some cool returns, and in the end, it was Alberto Del Rio winning the Royal Rumble, earning himself a shot at Edge's World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania. This should have been a straightforward story, but in 2011's WWE, nothing could be that simple. Edge successfully defended his title against Del Rio at WrestleMania, which was fine, but then, just days later on April 11th, Edge came out on Raw and dropped a bombshell that nobody saw coming. After years of neck problems and multiple surgeries, doctors told him that one more bump could leave him paralyzed or dead. Just like that, one of the greatest performers of the generation was gone. The announcement came out of nowhere, and it left SmackDown without a World Heavyweight Champion. WWE decided to hold a ladder match at Extreme Rules between Christian and Alberto Del Rio for the vacant title. And in a feel-good moment, Christian, Edge's best friend and longtime tag team partner, finally won his first World Heavyweight Championship after 16 years in the business. It was a beautiful story. Fans were happy for Christian. It felt like WWE was rewarding his dedication and giving a deserving veteran his moment in the sun. And then Vince McMahon killed it 5 days later. On a random episode of SmackDown, just 5 days after winning the championship, Christian lost the title to Randy Orton. No build, no story, just Vince apparently deciding that Christian wasn't championship material and taking the belt off him immediately. What followed was months of Christian begging for one more match against Orton, getting title shots, losing, begging for another one, losing again, turning heel out of desperation, and still losing. Christian and Orton had good matches together, but the whole angle felt like WWE was punishing Christian for having the audacity to win the championship in the first place. The whole SmackDown title scene in 2011 perfectly captured WWE's inability to commit to anything. Edge retired, Christian became champion, then Randy dethroned him, then Mark Henry dethroned Randy, and by the end of the year, we had half a dozen title changes. But as chaotic as the title scene was, it wasn't even close to being the weirdest thing happening on WWE television. For that, we need to go back to the absolute circus that was WrestleMania 27. WrestleMania 27 wasn't just bad because of the main event. The entire show felt like WWE had completely lost the plot on what their biggest event of the year should look like. Michael Cole, the commentator for Raw, had turned heel months earlier and started feuding with Jerry Lawler. At WrestleMania 27, this feud somehow got almost 20 minutes of ring time. Bryan versus Sheamus for the United States Championship got cut from the main show entirely and relegated to the pre-show because WWE needed time for Cole versus Lawler. Stone Cold Steve Austin was the special guest referee, which should have made it fun, but instead it was just painful to watch. Two commentators took up a quarter of an hour on WrestleMania, while actual talented performers either got bumped to the pre-show or didn't make the card at all. But the feud didn't end there. At Extreme Rules and Over the Limit, Cole and Lawler continued their rivalry with more bizarre stipulations and more mind-numbing matches. But somehow, this wasn't even the most bizarre part. Snooki from Jersey Shore, a reality TV star who had never trained as a wrestler, got a prominent spot on the WrestleMania card. She teamed with John Morrison and Trish Stratus against Dolph Ziggler and Lay Cool. And not only was she on the show, but she got the winning pin. WrestleMania 27, which was dubbed as the biggest WrestleMania of all time, ended up being an absolute clown show with just 2 good matches. The anonymous Raw general manager was still a thing too, with a laptop that would ding and send emails to Michael Cole. That was until the latter half of 2011, when this buffoon took over as Raw GM. Over on SmackDown, Cody Rhodes broke his nose and became undashing. Kane and Big Show were goofing around. You had a fake Obama show up at Capital Punishment. Sin Cara kept botching his entrance. And between Cole's glass cube, a laptop running the show, and Hornswoggle dancing with the Great Khali, early 2011 felt like WWE had become a full-blown cartoon show. But then, something happened that changed everything. In June 2011, a disgruntled wrestler sat down cross-legged at the top of a ramp and delivered a promo that would make everyone forget about Michael Cole's glass cube and remember why they loved wrestling in the first place. On June 20th, 2011, CM Punk sat down cross-legged at the top of the entrance ramp and delivered what would become known as the Pipe Bomb, an unfiltered rant that felt more real than anything WWE had done in over a decade. He called out Vince McMahon. He buried Triple H's politics. He mocked John Cena's merch machine. He name-dropped Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling. He mentioned Colt Cabana. And he revealed that his contract was expiring on July 17th at Money in the Bank, and he was planning to leave WWE with the championship. For the first time in years, wrestling felt unpredictable again. Was this a work? Was it a shoot? Was Punk actually leaving? The internet exploded with speculations, and fans couldn't look away. Money in the Bank in Chicago became one of the hottest tickets in wrestling history. Punk challenged John Cena for the WWE Championship in his hometown, and the atmosphere was electric. When Punk hit the GTS and pinned Cena in the middle of the ring, the building exploded. He grabbed the championship, blew a kiss to Vince McMahon at ringside, and left through the crowd like a folk hero escaping with stolen treasure. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Punk had the belt, his contract had expired, and he was free. WWE had created a storyline that existed both inside and outside their bubble, and fans were completely invested in where it would go next. But then, the company panicked and ruined everything. Instead of letting Punk stay gone for months and build the mystique, WWE brought him back after just 8 days. Instead of letting the story breathe and keeping fans guessing, they immediately shot themselves in the foot and made Rey Mysterio look like a clown in the process. At SummerSlam, Punk beat Cena to unify the championships, which should have been the ultimate triumph. Except immediately after winning, Kevin Nash, who hadn't been relevant in years, ran in and attacked Punk for no clear reason. Then Alberto Del Rio cashed in his briefcase and won the title, ending Punk's reign after less than a month. The summer of Punk that should have been a career-defining run became a confusing mess involving Kevin Nash texting himself, Triple H putting on a suit, and Punk getting lost in a corporate conspiracy storyline that nobody understood or cared about. By Night of Champions, instead of being WWE champion and leading a revolution, CM Punk was losing clean to Triple H. But while WWE was busy killing CM Punk's momentum, they were also stumbling into another weird situation that somehow captured both the insanity and entertainment value of 2011. 2011 gave us one of the most bizarre and weirdly entertaining pairings of all time. After losing a #1 contender match, R-Truth snapped, turned heel, and started smoking at ringside and ranting about conspiracy theories. Truth started talking to an imaginary friend named Little Jimmy, accused the audience of plotting against him, and poured drinks on fans in the front row. He wore Confederate soldier hats, spoke in paranoid rants, and acted like a man who had completely lost his mind. It was absurd. It made no sense. But somehow Truth committed so hard to the character that it actually worked. However, Truth wasn't the only person in WWE who was a victim of conspiracy. The Miz, who played a supporting role in his own Mania main event, joined forces with Truth, and the two became obsessed with the idea that there was a massive conspiracy keeping them out of the main event. They started attacking Triple H, they caused walkouts, invaded pay-per-views, and generally made life hell for WWE's corporate structure. At Vengeance in October, Triple H booked himself in a tag team match against Awesome Truth. His partner was none other than CM Punk, the same guy who 3 months earlier had been the rebellious anti-hero fighting against everything Triple H represented. Now Punk was partnering with the boss to fight guys complaining about not getting opportunities. It was bipolar booking at its finest. The year ended with CM Punk finally winning the WWE Championship at Survivor Series and beginning what would become a historic reign. Daniel Bryan cashed in Money in the Bank to win the World Heavyweight Championship at TLC. Triple H and Kevin Nash ran it back like it was 1995. Kane returned with a new mask. Cena and Rock teamed up at Survivor Series, and the Great Khali was somehow still employed. But after the mixed bag of 2011, it was time for the PG era's greatest year. A year when The Rock and John Cena collided in a dream match. When Brock Lesnar made his return. When three legends stepped inside Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania and marked the end of an era. When a man who claimed to be the best in the world spent 434 days proving it. When three men in tactical gear arrived from the crowd and changed everything. And these are just some of the things that happened in the unforgettable year of 2012. Our story begins a full year before WrestleMania 28. On the Raw after WrestleMania 27, with the crowd still buzzing, John Cena and The Rock stood in the same ring and made history by booking a match a full 12 months in advance. For the next year, these two traded barbs every time they shared a screen, and each confrontation felt heated. Cena accused The Rock of abandoning WWE the moment Hollywood came calling. The Rock fired back with everything he had, insulting Cena's colorful merchandise, his catchphrases, and even his real-life personal problems. On April 1st in Miami, two generations collided at WrestleMania 28. When The Rock hit the second rock bottom and got the pinfall, the place shook. Cena had lost on the grandest stage, clean, in front of the world, but Cena barely had time to process the defeat before something far more dangerous arrived. The very next night on Raw, Cena came out to offer The Rock his congratulations. Instead, he got an F5. Brock Lesnar, 8 years removed from WWE, fresh off a UFC career that included a heavyweight championship, had returned, and he made it clear from the first second that he was not here to play along. At Extreme Rules in Chicago, Brock and Cena collided in a match unlike anything the PG era had produced. For most of the fight, it was a mugging. Cena survived on sheer stubbornness, eventually cracking Lesnar with a chain and hitting an attitude adjustment onto the steel steps to steal the win. After this, Cena would go on to have a lackluster feud against John Laurinaitis and even win the Money in the Bank briefcase. But while Cena was making history in the main event, another piece of history was being made on the WrestleMania card itself, and it was being written for the last time. The Undertaker had spent nearly a year haunted by his WrestleMania 27 match against Triple H, where he had to be stretchered out of the building despite winning. He returned in January 2012 and immediately challenged the game to a rematch. Triple H resisted for weeks, telling the world he had moved on and had no interest in ending the streak. But when The Undertaker compared him to Shawn Michaels, the game snapped. HBK was added as the special guest referee. What followed at WrestleMania 28 was closer to a war than a wrestling match. Both men were broken by the end, and at several points, Shawn Michaels looked genuinely conflicted about whether to stop the whole thing. Michaels ultimately called it straight, and The Undertaker won, extending his streak to 20 wins. When it was over, all three men helped each other out of the arena, and the crowd understood that they were watching the end of an era. But while those legends were closing chapters, one man was determined to start a new one. CM Punk had entered 2012 as WWE champion, his reign already several months old after defeating Alberto Del Rio. He was the hottest act in wrestling, and for the first half of the year, the booking kept pace. He feuded with Chris Jericho and Daniel Bryan, but as the months ticked by, the frustration began to creep in. Punk was holding the most important title in the company, but The Rock and Cena were eating up every major headline. Then came milestone 1000th episode of Monday Night Raw. Punk retained his title against Cena in the main event, but after the match, The Rock appeared and saved Cena from an attack by Big Show. In the chaos, Punk turned heel and hit The Rock with the GTS. Punk dropped any remaining pretense of being misunderstood and leaned into the most compelling version of his character. An egotistical, entitled champion who was furious that nobody was giving him the respect he deserved. He aligned with Paul Heyman shortly after, and the two became one of the great manager-wrestler pairings in modern WWE. Together, they spent the rest of the year daring anyone to take the title, and nobody could. But while Punk was dominating Raw, the American Dragon was rising on SmackDown. Daniel Bryan had started the year as World Heavyweight Champion and a brilliant villain. Then he lost the title to Sheamus in 18 seconds at WrestleMania, and the crowd turned on the result immediately. The yes chants that Bryan had used mockingly as a heel were adopted by the audience as a genuine rallying cry. By the time summer arrived, Bryan had been folded into an absurd but hugely entertaining partnership with Kane. The two argued constantly, but somehow became tag team champions and one of the most popular acts on the show. Meanwhile, a new monster had arrived on Raw, Ryback, a powerhouse with a simple premise and a thunderous catchphrase who spent the year obliterating lower-card talent and building toward a WWE title shot. He very nearly won the title at Survivor Series, but just as Ryback was ready to reach the top, three men in tactical vests descended through the crowd. Dean Ambrose, Seth Rollins, and Roman Reigns, collectively, The Shield, put Ryback through the announce table with a triple powerbomb and helped Punk retain. It was one of the most stunning debuts in WWE history. Nobody knew who they were or whose side they were on. Within weeks it became clear. They were a force of nature, and they'd been lurking in the shadows waiting for the right moment to deliver justice. At TLC in December, they had their first official match, a tables, ladders, and chairs clash against Bryan, Kane, and Ryback, and won decisively, announcing to the world that a new era had not just arrived, but taken over. 2012 was a year WWE got a lot right. They delivered the biggest dream match in a generation. They brought back the most dangerous man on the planet. They sent off the last of the Attitude Era legends with the dignity they deserved. And in the final months, they planted the seeds for the next generation. This next generation would continue their takeover in 2013. 2013 was the year when The Rock and Cena ran it back in a WrestleMania rematch. When Daniel Bryan made the whole world chant along with him. When The Shield ran roughshod over every show, and Bray Wyatt arrived with his Wyatt family. When Mark Henry faked his own retirement, and when the Authority became the biggest villains of the era. But the year began with one of the most anticipated title matches in a decade. CM Punk had been champion for over 400 days, and The Rock was here to end that. At the Royal Rumble in January, the two delivered an excellent match, with The Rock surviving Shield interference before finishing Punk with the People's Elbow to end the longest WWE title reign in years. It was a thunderous moment, but it also immediately raised a problem. John Cena had won the Royal Rumble match that same night, which meant the only logical opponent for him at WrestleMania was the new champion. And so, WWE ran back Rock vs. Cena for a second time, despite the once-in-a-lifetime tagline from the year before. The build was quieter, but more intense. At WrestleMania in New Jersey, Cena defeated The Rock with an attitude adjustment to win his 11th WWE Championship. The two embraced afterward, and the rivalry that had defined two WrestleMania main events came to a quiet, respectful close. Meanwhile, the WrestleMania undercard had delivered the best match of the night. CM Punk, fresh off losing the title, had earned his streak shot by winning a fatal four-way on Raw. And then Paul Bearer, the Undertaker's longtime manager, passed away in real life just days before Mania. Punk and Heyman exploited the tragedy in one of the most sinister angles of the year, with Punk mocking Bearer's memory and carrying his iconic urn to the ring. It was genuinely uncomfortable, and it gave the match an emotional weight that the main event couldn't match. At WrestleMania, Punk came closer than almost anyone of his era to ending the streak. He hit the GTS, he cracked Taker with the urn, he kicked out of tombstones. The crowd was fully invested in every nearfall, but The Undertaker got the win and walked away with his dignity and his record intact. But while all of this was happening on the big stage, the most important story of 2013 was quietly building on Monday nights. Daniel Bryan had spent the first half of the year as a beloved babyface. John Cena, heading into SummerSlam as champion, made the decision to put Bryan up against him. At SummerSlam in Los Angeles, with Triple H as the special guest referee, Bryan and Cena had an excellent match. Bryan won clean with a running knee to the skull. The crowd erupted, confetti fell, and then, in seconds, his win was ripped away. Triple H attacked Bryan with a pedigree, and Randy Orton cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase to win the title. The Authority had been born. From the next night on Raw, Triple H and Stephanie McMahon openly declared Orton the face of WWE, the corporate champion, the hand-picked golden boy. And Bryan, he was told he was too small and too unconventional to be the face of a global company. The Authority weaponized the Shield as their enforcers and spent the rest of the year systematically beating Bryan down at every turn. Every time Bryan got close, the machine found another way to take it from him. But the crowd never stopped chanting. The Yes movement only grew louder with every injustice. And by year's end, it was obvious that Bryan was the most organically over superstar in the company. Running parallel to Bryan's story were the two most destructive new forces in WWE. The Shield had arrived in late 2012 and spent all of 2013 dismantling everything in their path. But then, in the second half of 2013, a very different kind of faction arrived from the other direction. Bray Wyatt descended on Raw in July, flanked by Luke Harper and Eric Rowan, and nothing about them looked like anything WWE had produced in years. Wyatt sat in a rocking chair at ringside, spoke in riddles and parables, and preached to an audience that had no idea what to make of him. His entrance, the lights cutting out, the crowd holding up phone screens like fireflies, was one of the most amazing things on Raw. They dismantled Kane, and by November, the Wyatt family and the Shield were orbiting the same space. The night they finally collided in a six-man tag, it was electric, because two great acts with real creative momentum had finally met in the ring. Away from those two big storylines, 2013 gave us plenty of individual moments worth remembering. The night after WrestleMania, Dolph Ziggler cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase on a beaten Alberto Del Rio and won the World Heavyweight Championship to one of the loudest crowd reactions of the year. The right crowd, the right moment, the right superstar. It was everything a cash-in should be. Then there was Mark Henry, who stood in the middle of the Raw ring in June and delivered what sounded like the most emotional retirement speech in years, even getting Cena to come to the ring to congratulate him, before dropping Cena with the world's strongest slam and declaring he had a lot left in the tank. It was one of the great swerves of the year, and Twitter absolutely lost its mind. CM Punk and Brock Lesnar met at SummerSlam in a war that many considered the match of the year. Also, the Rhodes brothers became unlikely fan favorites after Cody was fired by The Authority and Goldust, and Dusty Rhodes reunited to help win his brother's job back. 2013 was not a perfect year. The rematch nobody needed headlined WrestleMania. The Authority storyline ran circles around its own ending for months. But it was also the year the entire audience found a new superstar. The year two new factions permanently changed how WWE built characters. And the year the machine creaked loudly enough that everyone could hear it starting to break. The PG era was slowly transitioning into a more reality-focused era. WWE could no longer ignore the voices of the fans, and 2014 would be the year that sped up this movement. When the Shield imploded, when CM Punk's walkout changed the entire WrestleMania card, when the most sacred record in wrestling history was finally broken, and when a bearded underdog made an entire arena erupt in tears of joy on the same night, when Batista made his return to a chorus of boos. And these are just some of the things that happened in the chaotic year of 2014. In many ways, it was the year WWE was forced to listen to its fans, whether it wanted to or not. From the grandest stage of them all to the brutal summer heat of SummerSlam, 2014 reminded everyone that in professional wrestling, nothing ever goes exactly according to plan. Our story begins in late January at the Royal Rumble. Batista, the returning Hollywood action star, was supposed to win the Rumble match and march to WrestleMania as the conquering hero, but WWE had badly misread the room. For months leading into the event, one name had been on every fan's lips: Daniel Bryan. The scrappy, bearded underdog had become the most organically over-performer in the company. Every arena he walked into turned into a sea of yes chants. He was everything the crowd wanted, and the Authority seemed determined to give him everything but the spotlight. When Batista's music hit at the Rumble, the boos were immediate. The crowd rejected anyone who wasn't named Daniel Bryan. Even Rey Mysterio, one of the most beloved performers in company history, got booed mercilessly when he entered as the final participant. The Rumble ended with a loud negative reaction as Batista celebrated his win. But the Rumble week had one more earthquake to deliver. The following morning, CM Punk, who had entered the Rumble match at number 1 and lasted nearly an hour, walked out of WWE due to creative differences and health issues. The company's most outspoken performer was gone overnight, and suddenly WWE's plans for WrestleMania season had a massive hole in them. The backlash from the Rumble forced WWE's hand. Batista kept getting booed at every appearance, even against obvious heels. Meanwhile, Daniel Bryan refused to go away quietly. On the March 10th episode of Raw, Bryan led a group of fans in physically occupying the ring and demanded Triple H give him a WrestleMania match. The Authority figure, backed into a corner, agreed, with the stipulation that the winner would be inserted into the WWE Championship match that same night. And at WrestleMania 30 in New Orleans, Daniel Bryan delivered one of the great WrestleMania performances in history. He opened the show by defeating Triple H in a hard-fought match, then came back hours later to enter the main event and win the WWE Championship by forcing Batista to tap out. The entire Superdome erupted. The yes chants shook the building. It was the rare moment in wrestling where the story felt truly complete. The fans had willed it into existence, and for one night, it felt like anything was possible. Sadly, it didn't last. Bryan would suffer a neck injury just weeks later and be stripped of the title by June. But while WrestleMania 30 was Bryan's crowning night, there was another moment on that same show that changed WWE forever. For over 2 decades, The Undertaker's undefeated streak had been wrestling's one true constant. It had outlasted championship reigns, careers, and entire eras of the business. Going into WrestleMania 30, the streak stood at 21 wins, and not a single person inside the Mercedes-Benz Superdome genuinely believed Brock Lesnar was going to end it. Behind the scenes, even The Undertaker himself didn't know it was happening until the afternoon of the show. Vince McMahon changed the finish hours before bell time, convinced the moment would transform Lesnar into the biggest monster in WWE history. The Undertaker, who had shown up that day believing he was going over, was told at 1 p.m. that he wasn't. He accepted it like the professional he always was. What followed in the ring was brutal and ugly in the best possible way. Lesnar battered the dead man from the opening bell, delivering 3 F5s before covering him for the pin. The referee's hand hit the mat for the third time. The arena went completely silent. Fans sat frozen in their seats, mouths open, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. The streak was over. The decision divided wrestling fans instantly, but regardless of whether it was the right call, the impact was undeniable. Brock Lesnar was now wrestling's final boss. He backed up that reputation 4 months later at SummerSlam in a way nobody saw coming. John Cena, the face of WWE for a decade, stepped into the ring as champion. The fans expected a competitive match, but what they got was total destruction. Lesnar hit him with suplex after suplex while Cena barely got in any meaningful offense. The Beast Incarnate had conquered the streak, and now he had conquered the company's biggest hero. He won the WWE World Heavyweight Championship in dominant fashion. And for the rest of 2014, no one came anywhere close to his level. But while Lesnar cast a long shadow over the main event scene, the most compelling drama of 2014 unfolded inside a faction that had ruled the company since 2012. The Shield had spent nearly 2 years as one of the most dominant stables in company history. By early 2014, the fans had fallen in love with them, and the Shield had become the coolest act in the entire company. After WrestleMania, Triple H reformed Evolution with Randy Orton and Batista and set them on a collision course with the Shield. What followed were 2 of the most exciting multi-man matches ever. The Shield beat Evolution at Extreme Rules, then beat them again at Payback in a brutal no-holds-barred elimination match where not a single Shield member was eliminated. In back-to-back pay-per-views, 3 younger guys had completely dismantled one of the most legendary stables of all time. They were untouchable. They were on top of the world. And then, on the June 2nd episode of Raw, it all came crashing down. Triple H announced his Plan B. Seth Rollins smashed both Ambrose and Reigns with a steel chair without hesitation. He shook Triple H's hand and walked away from his brothers. The crowd sat in stunned silence. Nobody saw it coming. The betrayal was so shocking that it immediately became one of the great heel turns in modern WWE. The Shield was over, and what came next split into 2 separate, equally compelling stories. Dean Ambrose became a man possessed. He called Rollins a cancer, a sellout, and spent the summer hunting him down at every opportunity. The feud was raw and ugly in the best possible way. Ambrose was the unhinged underdog chasing the corporate snake. Rollins, meanwhile, traded his Shield gear for polished suits and the full backing of the Authority. Their feud ran through SummerSlam and Hell in a Cell, though Ambrose was repeatedly denied his revenge. Meanwhile, Roman Reigns was being carefully positioned as the next top babyface. The guy could move, he had the look, and crowds were beginning to react to him as a star. But another plot twist came at Survivor Series, and it belonged to someone nobody expected to see in the WWE. As Triple H's team was on the verge of winning and cementing the Authority's control, a figure emerged from the darkness wearing a black trench coat and face paint. A man who had spent his entire career in WCW and TNA, a man who had never once set foot in Vince McMahon's company, came down that ramp and changed the outcome of the match. Sting had finally arrived in WWE, and the wrestling world lost its mind. However, not every defining moment of 2014 happened in a main event. Some of the year's most important developments were quietly laying the foundation for the next decade of wrestling. The night after WrestleMania, a young woman with pale skin and dark hair walked out to the ring, congratulated AJ Lee on her championship victory, and immediately got slapped in the face for it. AJ, figuring this newcomer was no threat, agreed to defend her title on the spot. Within minutes, Paige had defeated AJ Lee to win the Divas Championship on her very first night on the main roster. And speaking of NXT, 2014 was the year it stopped being just a developmental show and started becoming a third brand. In February, NXT held its first ever live special on the brand new WWE network called NXT Arrival. And in May, the first takeover event followed. These were gritty and intense hours of wrestling featuring names like Sami Zayn, Neville, Charlotte, and Sasha Banks. By December, NXT produced one of the most celebrated moments of the year when Sami Zayn finally won the NXT Championship. On that same night, a new signing by the name of Kevin Owens made his debut, and he ended the celebration by brutalizing Zayn. In the span of one night, NXT produced a feel-good moment and a chilling new villain. It was better storytelling than most of what was happening on Raw. And as 2014 drew to a close, WWE found itself in an interesting position. It had a terrifying champion in Brock Lesnar who barely showed up. It had a destined for the top babyface in Roman Reigns who the fans weren't quite sold on yet. It had Seth Rollins emerging as one of the best heels in years. It had a developmental brand producing better wrestling than the flagship show. And it had just debuted the last major WCW icon leading to its biggest stage. The pieces were all on the board. 2014 was chaotic, unpredictable, and sometimes outright messy. But in that chaos, WWE built the future and set the stage for the madness of 2015. When Seth Rollins pulled off the heist of the century, when a WCW icon made his WrestleMania debut, when the dead man came back from the grave, when John Cena made the US title rival the WWE title, when NXT stopped being the B-show. And these are just some of the things that happened in the wild, unpredictable year of 2015. Coming off the chaos of 2014, WWE had a new champion who barely showed up and an upcoming star that the fans hadn't fully accepted. The result was a year full of moments nobody saw coming that shaped the next era of the business. The year kicked off in Philadelphia with a Royal Rumble that felt uncomfortably familiar. A year after the Pittsburgh crowd had rejected Batista's coronation, WWE walked right back into the same trap, just with a different name. Roman Reigns had been positioned all through 2014 as the next face of the company, and while the crowd didn't hate him the way they'd hated Batista, they certainly didn't love him the way WWE wanted. When Daniel Bryan, the man the fans had moved mountains to get to WrestleMania the previous year, entered the Rumble match and was eliminated relatively early, the Philadelphia fans made their feelings known immediately. Bryan's exit sucked the air out of the building. Reigns won the match, got his arm raised by The Rock, and was met with a chorus of boos. But here's the thing about 2015. Unlike 2014, WWE didn't scramble to rewrite the WrestleMania card. They committed to Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 31, and what followed was one of the most unpredictable main events in recent memory. Just not for the reason anyone expected. Lesnar ran through Reigns for most of the match. Reigns kept fighting back, refusing to stay down in a performance that was impressive regardless of what anyone thought of the booking. And then, right at the moment the crowd started to actually get behind him, the music hit. Seth Rollins sprinted to the ring, briefcase in hand. The Authority's Golden Boy cashed in Money in the Bank mid-match, turning the whole thing into a three-way scramble. Within minutes, Rollins hit his curb stomp on a battered Reigns, covered him, and became the first person in WWE history to successfully cash in his briefcase at WrestleMania. The crowd erupted for the sheer audacity to pull off such a heist in the Mania main event. Rollins had stolen the title, stolen the show, and stolen the spotlight from both men in the ring. It was the heist of the century, and it set the tone for everything that followed. John Cena had been destroyed by Lesnar the year before at SummerSlam, and failed to recapture the world title ever since. But heading into 2015, Cena stepped away from the main event scene for the first time in almost a decade, and got into a program for the US title. At WrestleMania, Cena beat Rusev for the US title, and what followed was one of the greatest mid-card title runs of all time. The US Open Challenge was simple in concept. Every Monday on Raw, Cena would walk to the ring and offer anyone in the locker room the chance to take the title from him. Week after week, credible opponents answered: Neville, Sami Zayn, Cesaro, and the matches were excellent. The United States Championship, a belt that had become an afterthought for years, suddenly felt important again. Cena was working like a man with something to prove, delivering the best in-ring performances of his late career. The challenge reached its peak in May when Cena issued his open invitation. The crowd waited, and then Kevin Owens walked out. The reigning NXT champion stepped up to Cena, grabbed a microphone, told Cena exactly who he was, and laid Cena out in the middle of the ring. At Elimination Chamber 2 weeks later, in a non-title match, Owens defeated John Cena. An NXT call-up had just walked onto the main stage and beaten the company's biggest star on his debut. Kevin Owens had arrived, and he did it in the loudest way possible. Their 3-match series across Elimination Chamber, Money in the Bank, and Battleground was the most consistently excellent feud of the first half of 2015. Owens had been elevated, the US title had been elevated, and the mid-card had briefly become the most exciting place to watch on Monday nights. However, while stars like Rollins and Owens were writing wrestling's future, 2015 also saw wrestling pay homage to its past. For decades, one name had floated above the rest when it came to stars who had never worked for WWE. Sting, the 6-time WCW champion, had spent his entire career refusing to come to WWE. When he finally debuted at Survivor Series 2014, the reaction was enormous. By WrestleMania season, the icon collided against Triple H in a match that paid tribute to the Monday Night Wars, with DX and the NWO all crashing the party. Triple H won the match, and the result immediately divided fans. JBL screamed on commentary that the right side had won again. WWE wanted one final victory lap over a company it had purchased 14 years earlier. Sting, who had waited his entire career for this moment, was handed a loss in his only WrestleMania match. It remains one of the most debated booking decisions in Mania history. Fans wanted a fairy tale, Instead, they got another taste of Triple H's golden shovel and corporate pettiness. But later that same night, something more emotionally satisfying happened. Bray Wyatt had spent months taunting The Undertaker. For the first time since losing his streak the year before, The Undertaker returned to WrestleMania. The match wasn't a classic, but the result was never really in question, and it didn't need to be. The Undertaker winning was the point. After the humiliation of losing the streak to Lesnar, this was a first step toward rebuilding the legend. The dead man walked out of Mania 31 with his head held up again, but The Undertaker wasn't done getting his revenge. The real business was still unfinished with Brock Lesnar, and both men knew it. At SummerSlam in August, they finally got their rematch. Undertaker won via Hell's Gate submission, though not clean, as the timekeeper rang the bell prematurely, thinking The Undertaker had tapped, creating a confusing finish that gave the win a tainted feeling. The rematch was set for Hell in a Cell in October. This time, the match was even more brutal. Lesnar eventually won, earning what felt like the definitive victory in their modern rivalry. Then, in a chilling final image, the Wyatt family emerged from the darkness after the match, carrying the broken body of The Undertaker out of the arena into the unknown. But while these feuds dominated the upper midcard, Seth Rollins was quietly stealing the show in the main event. For most of 2015, Seth Rollins was the best thing in WWE. As the reigning WWE World Heavyweight Champion, he defended the title constantly, feuded with Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, John Cena, and Dean Ambrose, and delivered match after match of excellent wrestling. He was smug, entertaining, and protected by a revolving door of authority goons who gave him just enough cover to be the slimy heel the role demanded. For 220 days, he was the most compelling performer in the company. But then, on November 4th, at a routine live event in Dublin, Ireland, Rollins attempted a sunset flip powerbomb and landed wrong. He tore his ACL, MCL, and medial meniscus simultaneously. By the next morning, he had vacated the title. Just like that, one of the best championship reigns of the era was over in an instant. A 16-man tournament was announced for Survivor Series, with the final rounds taking place on the pay-per-view itself. Roman Reigns, who had been positioned as Rollins' next challenger, was now the tournament favorite. He fought through the bracket, beat Dean Ambrose in the final, and stood in the ring as WWE champion for the first time. And then, Sheamus appeared. The big red-haired Irishman, who had been holding the Money in the Bank briefcase for months, ran to the ring and cashed in to become WWE champion. What followed was a feud between Reigns and the League of Nations that existed almost entirely for Reigns to look strong. The year ended with Reigns eventually winning the title back from Sheamus and heading into 2016 as champion. But while the main event picture stumbled to its feet, other corners of WWE were quietly thriving in 2015. The biggest surprise of the year may have been The New Day. Debuting in late 2014 as a gospel-themed babyface group, Big E, Kofi Kingston, and Xavier Woods had been met with near-universal indifference. Crowds didn't care. The gimmick wasn't working. So in early 2015, WWE made a decision that changed everything. They turned heel. What followed was one of the most remarkable character reinventions in recent memory. By the second half of the year, they were tag team champions and the most fun act on the show. The women's division also underwent a major transformation in 2015. Charlotte, Sasha Banks, and Becky Lynch had been tearing the house down at Full Sail all year, and in July, Stephanie McMahon brought all three to the main roster simultaneously, dubbing it the Divas Revolution. Meanwhile, back in NXT, the real revolution was already in full swing. At NXT TakeOver Brooklyn, Sasha Banks and Bayley delivered what many consider the greatest women's wrestling match in WWE history. 2 months later, they did it again at TakeOver Respect in a 30-minute Iron Man match. When the year finally closed out, WWE was in a familiar place. Complicated, contradictory, messy in its main event picture, but genuinely exciting everywhere else. But as the year came to an end, WWE was ready for another brand split with international stars arriving on the main roster and setting the stage for the modern era. When AJ Styles made his shocking debut, when The Shield went to war, when Shane McMahon jumped from the top of the cell, when Chris Jericho started putting people on the list, when the brand split reignited a war between Raw and SmackDown, when Goldberg destroyed Brock Lesnar in 90 seconds. And these are just some of the moments that defined the unforgettable year of 2016. But as 2016 arrived with new faces and a brand split, the PG era reached its end and WWE transitioned to its modern era. And if you want to revisit the entire year of 2016, check out this video next.